The first scream of the ice breaking beneath her feet was swallowed by the roar of the mountain wind, and Meredith Wallace knew she was going to die in the frozen creek before anyone even realized she was missing. She'd been foolish, stepping onto what looked like solid ice to retrieve the bucket she'd dropped while drawing water from Vasquez Creek, just outside Denver, Colorado, in the winter of 1872. The bucket had been her mother's, one of the few things she'd brought west after the cholera took her parents 5 years ago, and some stubborn part of her refused to let it go. Now that sentimentality would cost her life. The water was so cold, it felt like knives stabbing every inch of her skin. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the current pulling at her heavy wool skirt, dragging her down beneath the jagged shelf of ice. Her fingers scraped uselessly against the slick surface as she tried to find purchase, but the creek was swollen with snowmelt from the mountains, and the current was merciless. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. She was 23 years old, had survived the journey west, had built a life for herself working at the boarding house in Denver, and this was how it would end. Alone, frozen, forgotten beneath the ice of a nameless creek. Then something crashed through the ice above her, and a hand seized her wrist with crushing force. She was being pulled up, hauled through the freezing water with such strength that it felt like her arm might tear from its socket. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, choking on air and water both, as strong arms wrapped around her and dragged her onto the snowy bank. "Breathe," a rough voice commanded. "Come on, breathe." Meredith's lungs burned as she coughed up creek water, her whole body shaking so violently she couldn't control it. She was dimly aware of hands moving over her, checking for injuries, and then she was being lifted as if she weighed nothing at all. "Gotta get you warm," the voice said, and through her blurred vision, she caught a glimpse of the man who'd pulled her out. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed impossibly broad beneath his thick bearskin coat. Dark hair hung past his shoulders, wet now from the creek, and his face was all hard angles and weathered skin, with a beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes were an unusual pale gray, like winter sky, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that might have frightened her if she wasn't already terrified. "My cabin's close," he said, and started moving through the snow with long, powerful strides, carrying her as if she were a child. "Need to get you out of those wet clothes before you freeze to death." Meredith wanted to protest, wanted to say something about propriety and strangers, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. She'd lived in Denver long enough to know about the mountain men who came down from the high country to trade their furs, wild and rough and dangerous. This man was clearly one of them. She should be afraid. But the cold was so deep in her bones that all she could feel was grateful. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. It was small but solid, built of thick logs chinked tight against the winter wind, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. The man kicked the door open and brought her inside, and the warmth hit her like a physical thing. "Here." He set her on her feet near the stone fireplace, where a fire was already burning. His hands went to the buttons of her coat, then paused. "I need to get these wet things off you, or you will die. Understand?" She nodded, still shaking too hard to speak. He worked quickly and efficiently, stripping off her sodden coat, her dress, her layers of undergarments, with the detached competence of someone who'd seen emergencies before. He wrapped her in what felt like every blanket he owned, then in a thick bearskin, before lowering her into a chair close to the fire. "Can you hold this?" He pressed a tin cup of something hot into her hands. She could barely grip it, but she managed. "Drink. It's just tea, but it's hot." The liquid burned her throat going down, but it was a good burn, a living burn. Slowly, painfully, feeling started to return to her extremities. With it came the full realization of what had just happened and what could have happened. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." "You were being stupid," he said bluntly, hanging her wet clothes near the fire on a line that was clearly meant for drying furs. "That ice was too thin. You should have known better." "I dropped my bucket," she said, knowing it sounded foolish even as she said it. "It was my mother's." He glanced at her, and something in his expression softened slightly. "Did you get it?" "No. I will look for it when the creek calms. Might have washed downstream." He poured himself a cup of tea and leaned against the wall, watching her with those pale eyes. "I am Owen Vance. I trap in the high country, but I come down to Denver sometimes to trade." Meredith Wallace, she said. I work at the Miller boarding house in town. I needed fresh water and the pump at the boarding house is frozen. You walked all the way to the creek alone? In winter? It is not that far, only about a mile. And I have done it before. Alone, he repeated, and there was something like anger in his voice now. A woman alone in this weather. What if I had not been checking my traps? What if no one had heard you fall through? No one did hear me, she pointed out. The wind was too loud. You must have seen me. I saw someone walking toward the creek when I was coming back from the trap line. Thought it was strange, so I followed. He shook his head. Lucky for you. Very lucky, she agreed quietly. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Meredith studied him when she thought he was not looking. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably not much past 30, though his face had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors in harsh conditions. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked with them every day. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, in his own space. How long have you lived out here? She asked. 6 years in the high country, 8 years in Colorado territory altogether. He poured more tea into her cup without asking. Came out after the war, needed somewhere quiet. She knew better than to ask which side he'd fought on. The war had been over for 7 years, but the wounds it left were still raw for many. Do you ever get lonely? No. The answer was immediate, almost defensive. Then he seemed to reconsider. Or I did not used to. Maybe I do now, hard to say. I think I would go mad being alone so much. I think I would go mad being around people so much, he countered. Cities are too loud, too many people wanting things, saying things they do not mean. Out here, it is simple. You work, you survive. The mountains do not lie to you. But they will kill you without a second thought. So will people, at least the mountains are honest about it. She could not argue with that. She'd seen enough of human cruelty in her 23 years to know he had a point. Your clothes will not be dry until tomorrow, Owen said after another long silence. The boarding house will worry about you. Mrs. Miller knows I sometimes take my time. She will not worry until nightfall. Meredith looked down at herself, wrapped in blankets and bearskin. But I cannot exactly walk back like this. No, he agreed. You will stay here tonight. I will take you back to town in the morning. The proper thing would have been to protest, to insist on going back immediately. Reputation be damned. But Meredith had stopped caring quite so much about propriety since coming west. Out here, survival mattered more than social niceties. And the truth was, she felt safe here with this gruff mountain man, safer than she'd felt in a long time. All right, she said, thank you. He nodded, seemingly relieved that she was not going to make it difficult. You can have the bed. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. You nearly died today. You need proper rest. He stood, moving to a shelf where he pulled down some dried meat and a loaf of bread that looked like he'd made it himself. Are you hungry? She was, she realized, starving. Yes. They ate together in companionable silence. The food was simple but good, and Meredith found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Owen was not much of a talker, but he seemed content to let the silence stand between them, and there was something restful about that. She was so used to the constant chatter of the boarding house, the endless demands and questions and gossip. This quiet felt like a balm. After they ate, Owen showed her to the bed, which was in a small alcove at the back of the cabin. It was narrow but looked comfortable, with thick blankets and what felt like a feather mattress. She climbed in, still wrapped in the bearskin, and watched as he banked the fire and spread his own bedroll on the floor. Owen, she called softly. Yes? Thank you. Truly, you saved my life today. He was silent for a long moment. Get some sleep, Meredith. She did, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. When she woke, it was to the smell of coffee and the gray light of dawn filtering through the cabin's single window. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where she was. Owen was at the fire, cooking something in a cast-iron pan. He glanced over when he heard her move. Your clothes are dry. They are on the chair. Thank you. She gathered them up and retreated behind a canvas curtain he'd rigged up for her, dressing quickly. The dress was stiff from drying by the fire, but it was warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. When she emerged, he handed her a plate of eggs and fried bread. "Eat. Then I will take you back to town." The walk back to Denver was quiet, both of them trudging through the snow in silence. Owen carried his rifle slung over one shoulder and moved with the easy, ground-eating stride of someone used to covering long distances on foot. Meredith found herself having to hurry to keep up, even though he was clearly moderating his pace for her. When they reached the outskirts of town, he stopped. "You know the way from here?" "Yes. The boarding house is just 3 blocks north." She hesitated, not sure what to say. "Will you come into town sometime? So I can thank you properly?" "You have thanked me." "I feel like I should do more. Buy you a meal at least." He looked uncomfortable with the idea, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I do not spend much time in town." "But you do come to trade sometimes, you said." "Sometimes." "Then perhaps I will see you then." She smiled at him, and after a moment he gave her a stiff nod. "Perhaps?" She watched him walk away, his broad back disappearing into the snow, and felt an unexpected pang of something. Regret? Loneliness? She could not quite name it. Mrs. Miller was full of questions when Meredith returned, demanding to know where she'd been, why she'd been gone all night. Meredith told her the truth, or most of it, about falling through the ice and being rescued by a trapper. The older woman clucked her tongue and fussed over her, making her sit by the fire and drink hot soup. But Meredith could see the calculations going on behind her eyes. A night alone with a man, even if it was innocent, would be enough to ruin her reputation in some circles. But this was Denver, not Boston or New York. People were more practical here, more forgiving of the necessities of survival. And Mrs. Miller, for all her nosiness, was a practical woman. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose you are lucky he was there. Things could have gone very differently." "I know," Meredith said quietly. "I know." The days that followed fell back into their usual rhythm. Meredith worked at the boarding house, cooking and cleaning and managing the guests. She poured coffee for miners and merchants, changed linens, kept the accounts. It was good, honest work, and she was grateful for it. But she found her thoughts drifting again and again to the cabin in the snow, to the gruff mountain man who'd saved her life. 2 weeks passed before she saw Owen again. She was at the general store buying supplies for Mrs. Miller when she spotted him through the window. He was loading furs onto a pack mule, his movements efficient and economical. Without thinking, she hurried outside. "Owen!" He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Meredith. I did not know you were in town." She felt suddenly foolish, like a schoolgirl chasing after a boy. "How long are you staying?" "Just today. I need to trade these furs and get supplies before I head back up." "Have you eaten?" "There's a restaurant just down the street. I said I wanted to buy you a meal." He hesitated, and she could see him searching for an excuse to refuse. But then his stomach growled audibly, and he gave her a rueful look. "I suppose I am hungry." The restaurant was small and simple, but the food was good. They sat across from each other at a corner table, and Meredith found herself studying him again. In the daylight, she could see more details. The way his hair was actually several shades of brown, from almost black to sunlightened chestnut, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way his hands, so large and rough, were surprisingly gentle when he handled things. "What made you become a trapper?" she asked. "Needed work. Needed to be alone." He took a bite of his steak, chewing thoughtfully. The mountains seemed like a good place for both. "Do you ever miss people? Conversation?" "Not usually." He paused. "But I've been thinking about what you said. About going mad from loneliness. Maybe you were right." "I think there is a difference between being alone and being lonely," Meredith said. "You can be alone and content, or you can be surrounded by people and lonely. I know which one I would prefer." "Which?" "Alone and content. At least then you are honest about it." He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "You are an unusual woman, Meredith Wallace." "I will take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. They talked for over an hour, and Meredith was surprised at how easy it was once Owen relaxed a little. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to trap from an old French-Canadian trader, about the harsh beauty of the high country in winter. She told him about her life in Ohio before her parents died, about the journey west with her uncle's family, about how she'd ended up on her own in Denver when her uncle decided to try his luck in California. "You did not want to go with them?" Owen asked. "No, I like Denver. It feels like somewhere I could belong, maybe. Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said quietly. "The mountains feel that way to me." When they finally left the restaurant, the sun was already sinking toward the peaks to the west. Owen needed to finish his trading before the stores closed, and Meredith needed to get back to the boarding house, but she found herself reluctant to say goodbye. "When will you be back in town?" she asked. "A month, maybe 6 weeks. Depends on the trapping." "Will you come see me when you are back?" He looked at her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Because I would like to see you again. Is that not reason enough?" "I am not good company, Meredith. I am rough, and I do not know how to talk to people most of the time. You could do much better than a mountain man who smells like beaver pelts." "I do not want better," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "I want interesting. I want honest. You are both those things. You barely know me. Then let me get to know you better." He shook his head, but she could see he was pleased despite himself. "You are persistent." "I have to be. I have made my own way in the world since I was 18. Persistence is how I survived." "All right," he said finally. "I will come see you when I am back in town. But do not expect too much." "I expect exactly what you are," she said. "Nothing more, nothing less." She watched him walk away again, leading his mule toward the trading post, and felt that same strange pang in her chest. But this time, she could name it. Anticipation. Hope. The beginning of something she could not quite define but very much wanted to explore. The next 6 weeks were the longest of Meredith's life. She went about her work at the boarding house, but part of her mind was always elsewhere, wondering when Owen would come back to town. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way he'd carried her so easily from the frozen creek, the way his eyes had softened when she thanked him, the rare smile that had transformed his stern face. Mrs. Miller noticed, of course. "You have been distracted," she said one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner. "Is there something on your mind?" "Just thinking about things," Meredith said evasively. "Would those things involve a certain mountain man?" Meredith felt her cheeks heat. "Perhaps." "He seems like a good man," Mrs. Miller said, surprising her. "Rough around the edges, but solid. Those are the kind that last out here." "I barely know him." "You know enough. You know he saved your life without hesitation. You know he treated you with respect when he could have taken advantage. You know he makes you smile when you think no one is watching." Mrs. Miller patted her hand. "That's enough to start with, child. The rest you learn as you go." It was another 2 weeks before Owen returned to Denver. Meredith was hanging laundry in the backyard of the boarding house when she saw him walking up the alley, his rifle over his shoulder and his long hair tied back with a leather cord. Her heart did something strange in her chest. "Owen!" She dropped the sheet she'd been hanging and hurried over. "I did not know you were coming today." "Just got in. Thought I would," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Thought I would come see you, like I said I would." "I am glad." She was grinning like a fool and did not care. "Are you staying in town tonight?" "Was planning on it. Need to trade tomorrow, and it is too late to start now." "Then have dinner with us, at the boarding house. Mrs. Miller will not mind, and the food is good." He looked like he wanted to refuse, but he nodded. "All right. What time?" 6 o'clock. Come to the kitchen door and I will let you in." He arrived exactly at 6, having clearly made an effort to clean up. His hair was damp and neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and he'd changed into a clean shirt. Meredith felt something warm bloom in her chest at the realization that he'd done this for her. Dinner was a boisterous affair, with a dozen boarders crowding around the long table, all talking over each other. Owen looked overwhelmed at first, but Meredith stayed close to him, drawing him into conversation when she could, deflecting the more intrusive questions. Gradually, he relaxed, even laughing at a joke one of the miners told. After dinner, they escaped to the back porch, both of them grateful for the quiet. The night was cold but clear, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did back east. "Thank you for coming," Meredith said. "I know this is not your preference." "It was not as bad as I thought," Owen admitted. "Your Mrs. Miller is a formidable woman." "She is, but she has a good heart." Meredith pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. Will you stay in town long this time? Just tomorrow for trading. Then I need to head back up. This is my last trip down before spring. I will winter in the high country. All alone? She could not keep the dismay out of her voice. I have done it before. I have enough supplies and the cabin is solid. But if something happened, if you got hurt or sick, there would be no one to help you. That is the risk. He turned to look at her fully. Why does it matter to you, Meredith? We've only met a handful of times. Because, she searched for the right words, because you matter to me. I do not know why exactly, but you do. Is that so hard to believe? Yes, he said bluntly. I am not the kind of man women like you usually notice. What kind of woman am I then? Good, decent, deserving of better than a half-wild mountain man. You keep saying that, Meredith said, frustrated, but you do not get to decide what I deserve, Owen. I do. And I am telling you that I would like to get to know you better. I would like you to stay in touch, even if it is just a letter now and then. I would like to see you when you come to town. Is that truly so impossible? He stared at her for a long moment, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight from the kitchen window. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched her cheek with one calloused finger. You could break my heart, Meredith Wallace. Only if you let me close enough, she whispered. That is what I'm afraid of. But he did not pull away, and neither did she. They stood there on the cold porch, close enough to feel each other's warmth, and Meredith felt the world narrow down to just this moment, just the two of them. I do not know how to do this, Owen said quietly. I've been alone for so long, I do not remember how to be with someone. Neither do I, Meredith admitted. I've been on my own since I was 18. I've forgotten how to let anyone in, but maybe we could figure it out together. He smiled at that rare, transformative smile. Maybe we could. He left the next evening after finishing his trading, but not before spending the whole day with Meredith. They walked through Denver together, him pointing out the best places to find game in the foothills, her showing him the garden plot she was planning to expand in the spring. They had lunch at the same restaurant as before, and this time the conversation flowed even more easily. He told her about his plans for the winter, about the cabin he'd built with his own hands, about the beauty of the mountains under snow. She told him about her dreams of maybe owning her own boarding house someday, about the friends she'd made in Denver, about how much she loved watching the sunset over the peaks. When it was time for him to leave, she walked with him to the edge of town. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered mountains gold and pink. I will miss you, she said, surprised by how true it was. I will miss you too. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. I made this for you, for when you go to the creek. It is a whistle. If you are ever in trouble, blow it. Sound carries in the mountains. Someone will hear. She took it, tears stinging her eyes. Thank you. And this. He handed her a folded piece of paper. It is a map to my cabin. If you need me, if anything happens, you can find me. Or you can send someone to find me. Owen, she did not know what to say. The gesture felt enormous, this man who valued his solitude giving her the means to breach it. I will be back in the spring, he said. April, probably, when the pass is open. Will you wait for me? Yes, she said without hesitation. I will wait. He cupped her face in both his large hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, hoped he would, but he just pressed his forehead to hers. Stay safe, Meredith. You too. Then he was gone, striding off into the gathering darkness, and she was left holding a whistle and a map and a heart that felt fuller and emptier all at once. The winter months dragged by. Meredith threw herself into her work at the boarding house, but the days felt endless. She wrote to Owen long letters that she had no way to send, telling him about her days, her thoughts, the way the city looked under snow. She kept them in a box under her bed, hoping to give them to him when he returned. February brought a cold snap that froze pipes all over Denver and made even the short walk to the well an ordeal. March came in like the lion it was supposed to, with blizzards that shut down the town for days at a time. Meredith found herself worrying constantly about Owen, alone in his cabin in the high country. Was he warm enough? Did he have enough food? What if something had happened to him and no one would know until spring? She tried to distract herself, but it was no use. She had fallen for him, she realized. Somehow, in just a few short meetings, the gruff mountain man had worked his way into her heart. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt right. Inevitable, even. April finally arrived, bringing warmer temperatures and the first hints of green. The snow began to melt, the creeks running high and fast with runoff. Meredith watched the roads, hoping every day to see a familiar tall figure walking into town. It was the second week of April when Mrs. Miller came rushing into the kitchen. "Meredith, there is someone here to see you." She dropped the bread dough she was kneading and ran to the front door, her heart pounding. Owen stood on the porch, looking thinner than she remembered, but alive, so wonderfully alive. Without thinking, she launched herself at him, throwing her arms around his neck. He caught her easily, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, and she felt him bury his face in her hair. "I missed you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Meredith, I missed you so much." "I missed you too." She pulled back just enough to look at him, drinking in every detail. "Are you all right? You look like you lost weight." "It was a hard winter, but I am fine now." He smiled at her. "Better than fine. Come inside, let me feed you properly." She installed him in the kitchen and set about making him a proper meal while he watched, a small smile playing around his lips. Mrs. Miller bustled in and out, giving them significant looks but wisely leaving them mostly alone. When Meredith finally set a plate of beef stew and fresh bread in front of him, he ate like a starving man. "Was it truly that bad?" she asked, concerned. "No, I had plenty of food. I just got tired of my own cooking." He reached across the table and took her hand. "And I was lonely. You were right about that. I spent all winter thinking about you, wishing I could talk to you. It was the longest winter of my life." "Mine too," she admitted. "I need to trade and get supplies, but then—" "Meredith, will you come up to the cabin with me? Just for a visit, I mean. I want you to see it, see where I live, and I do not want to wait weeks to see you again." "I would love to," she said, "but Mrs. Miller needs me here." "I can spare you for a few days," Mrs. Miller said from the doorway, making them both jump. "The girl has been pining all winter. Take her to see your cabin, Mr. Vance, but you bring her back safely, you hear?" "I will guard her with my life," Owen said solemnly. 2 days later, they set out for the mountains. Owen had bought her proper boots and warm clothes, insisting she needed better gear if she was going to be traveling in the high country. They rode mules, following trails that only Owen seemed to be able to see, climbing steadily higher as the pine forests grew thicker around them. It took 2 days to reach his cabin, camping one night under the stars. Owen set up a tent for her and slept by the fire, ever the gentleman, though she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. They talked late into the night, about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and how much she still missed them. He told her about the war, about the things he'd seen and done, about how the mountains had saved him from the darkness that had threatened to swallow him whole. "I am not that man anymore," he said, staring into the fire. "The mountains burned it out of me, little by little. Out here, the past does not matter. Only surviving the next day, the next storm. It gave me something to focus on besides the memories." "Do you still have nightmares?" she asked gently. "Sometimes, but less than I used to." He looked at her. "Do you?" "About my parents sometimes. About being alone." "You are not alone," he said fiercely. "Not anymore. I am here. And I am grateful for that. More grateful than you know." The cabin, when they finally reached it, was more impressive than she'd expected. It was solidly built, with a good roof and tight walls, and inside it was cozy and well organized. Owen had clearly put real effort into making it a home, not just a shelter. There were shelves full of books, furs on the floor for warmth, even a rocking chair he'd built himself. "This is wonderful," Meredith said, turning in a slow circle. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it. Some things I bought in town." He looked almost shy. "I'm glad you like it." They spent 3 days at the cabin, and they were some of the happiest days of Meredith's life. Owen showed her his trap lines, taught her how to identify animal tracks, took her to a meadow high above the tree line where the view stretched for miles. They talked and laughed and sat in comfortable silence, and slowly, gradually, they drew closer. It was on their last evening that things finally came to a head. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, Meredith in the rocking chair and Owen on the floor beside her, when she reached down and ran her fingers through his hair. He went very still. "Meredith," he said, his voice strained, "you should not do that." "Why not?" "Because I am barely holding on to my control as it is. I have wanted to kiss you since the day I pulled you out of that creek, and if you keep touching me like that, I am not going to be able to stop myself." "Then do not stop yourself," she said softly. He turned to look at her, his pale eyes almost glowing in the firelight. "I am trying to be honorable here. I do not want you to be honorable. I want you to be honest." She slid out of the chair and knelt beside him. "Owen, I have feelings for you, strong feelings, and I think you have feelings for me too. Why are we fighting this? Because once we start down this road, there is no going back, and I do not want to hurt you. You will hurt me more if you push me away." She took his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of his beard against her palms. "I am not some fragile thing that will break. I am a survivor, just like you, and I am choosing this. I am choosing you." He made a low sound in his throat, and then he was kissing her, his mouth hot and demanding on hers. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the last 6 months, her fingers tangling in his hair. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and she could feel the rapid beat of his heart matching her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words coming out rough and unpracticed. "I do not know when it happened, but I love you, Meredith, and it scares the hell out of me." "I love you too," she whispered, "and it scares me too, but I think that is all right. I think being scared means it matters." "It matters more than anything," he said. "You matter more than anything." They sat there by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and Meredith felt something settle deep in her bones. This was right. This was real. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next morning, they rode back down to Denver, but everything had changed. Owen did not leave immediately for his traplines as he usually did. Instead, he stayed in town, renting a room at the boarding house, spending every moment he could with Meredith. They were the talk of Denver within a week, the proper young woman from the boarding house and the wild mountain man, but neither of them cared. "I have been thinking," Owen said one evening as they walked along the creek where they had first met, "about the future." "What about it?" "I cannot ask you to live in the cabin year-round. It is too isolated, too hard. But I cannot give up trapping either. It is who I am. I know that. I would never ask you to. So I was thinking maybe we could compromise. I could trap in the winter like I do now, but I could spend more time in Denver in the summer and fall. Maybe build us a small house here in town, somewhere we could be together, but I could still have my work." "Us?" she said, her heart fluttering. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Marry me, Meredith. I know I am not much of a catch. I am rough and I do not have much to offer besides a cabin in the mountains and a pile of furs. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend my life with you. What do you say?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and then he was kissing her again, deep and thorough and full of promise. When he finally set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "We should do it soon," he said. "I do not want to wait." "Neither do I." They were married 2 weeks later in the little church in Denver, with Mrs. Miller and half the boarding house as witnesses. Meredith wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Owen wore his best shirt and actually trimmed his beard. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them man and wife, Owen kissed her so thoroughly that several people in the congregation gasped. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Denver, in a room with clean sheets and a real feather bed. Owen was gentle and patient, careful with her inexperience, and when it was over, she lay in his arms and felt complete in a way she never had before. "I never thought I could have this," Owen said quietly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "A wife, a family, a future that did not involve dying alone in the mountains. You have given me everything, Meredith." "You have given me everything too," she said. "A home, a partner, someone who sees me for who I really am and loves me anyway." They stayed in Denver for another month, while Owen helped her build a small house on the outskirts of town. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Mrs. Miller cried when Meredith left the boarding house, but she was happy for her, could see that she'd found something rare and precious. In June, they went up to the cabin together, and Meredith spent the summer in the high country with her husband. It was hard work helping him with the traps and preserving the meat and maintaining the cabin, but she loved it. She loved the quiet, the beauty, the simplicity of life reduced to its essentials. And she loved watching Owen in his element, seeing how he moved through the mountains with such confidence and grace. They made love under the stars and in the cabin, learning each other's bodies, finding rhythms that worked for them. Owen was an attentive lover, always making sure she was satisfied before seeking his own release. And Meredith discovered that she had a passionate nature she'd never suspected, that with the right man she could be bold and adventurous. In August, she realized she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and she watched his face transform from surprise to wonder to fierce joy. "A baby," he said, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" He laughed and pulled her into his lap. "Meredith, I'm more than happy. I do not even have words for what I am. Grateful, blessed, terrified." "Terrified? What if I'm not a good father? What if I do not know how?" "You will learn," she said, kissing him gently. "We both will. Together." They went back down to Denver in September, settling into their little house for the winter. Owen still trapped, but he stayed closer to town, never gone for more than a few days at a time. He was fiercely protective of Meredith, fussing over her constantly, making sure she did not overwork herself. The baby was born in March of 1873, a healthy boy with his father's pale eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Oliver, and Owen cried when he held his son for the first time, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. "I never thought I would have this," he kept saying. "Never thought I deserved this." "You deserve all the happiness in the world," Meredith said, exhausted but elated. "And so do I. And so does our son." Being parents changed them both. Owen was endlessly patient with Oliver, singing to him in a surprisingly good voice, rocking him for hours when he fussed. Meredith found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, managing the house and the baby, and still making time for her husband. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and blissfully happy. When summer came, they debated whether to go up to the cabin, but decided it was too hard with an infant. Owen made shorter trips into the mountains instead, never gone for more than a week, always rushing back to his family. He was making good money from his furs, and they were building a real life together. Oliver was a year old when Meredith got pregnant again. This time she was not surprised, given how often she and Owen made love. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in February of 1874, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Meredith's mother. Owen doted on both his children, but there was something special about the way he looked at his tiny daughter, a tenderness that made Meredith's heart ache. "She is perfect," he said, holding Margaret with the kind of terrified reverence only a father of daughters could understand. "She looks just like you." "She has your nose," Meredith pointed out. "Ha, poor thing." "I love your nose. You have to say that. You married me." "I married you because I love everything about you," Meredith said, "including your nose." Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Owen trapped in the winter, staying closer to home now that he had a family. In the summers, they would sometimes go up to the cabin, all 4 of them, and teach the children about the mountains. Oliver grew up strong and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to explore. Margaret was quieter, more thoughtful, but she had her father's intensity and her mother's determination. When Oliver was 5 and Margaret was 3, Meredith got pregnant again. This time it was twins, 2 more boys they named Owen Jr. and Oscar. Owen was convinced he was going to lose his mind with 4 children, but Meredith just laughed. "You will be fine," she said. "You are the strongest man I know." "Strong has nothing to do with it. I am outnumbered." But he rose to the challenge, as he always did. The house they'd built was too small now, so he built an addition, then another. Their little house on the outskirts of Denver grew into a proper home, filled with noise and life and love. The years passed. Oliver grew tall and broad-shouldered like his father, and by the time he was 16, he was accompanying Owen on his trap lines, learning the trade. Margaret became a teacher at the schoolhouse in Denver, beloved by her students for her patience and kindness. The twins were hellions, always getting into trouble, but they were good boys at heart. And through it all, Owen and Meredith's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration, but at the end of every day, they came back to each other, remembering what they'd built together, what they'd survived. One evening in the spring of 1889, 17 years after they'd married, they sat on the porch of their expanded house and watched the sunset over the mountains. The children were all inside, the older ones helping the younger with their lessons, and for a moment it was just the two of them. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked. "Marrying a mountain man? You could have had an easier life." "Not for a single second," Meredith said firmly. "This is the life I chose. You are the man I chose, and I would choose you again, 1,000 times over." He took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I pulled you out of that frozen creek, but you saved my life just as surely. I was drowning in loneliness and anger, and you pulled me out. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive." "We saved each other," she said. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Inside, they could hear their children laughing, arguing, living. It was chaos, and it was beautiful, and it was home. "I love you, Meredith Vance," Owen said quietly. "I love you too, Owen Vance," she replied, "always and forever." And as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched them fall in love all those years ago, they knew that their story was far from over. There would be more years, more challenges, more joys. Their children would grow and have children of their own. The mountains would endure, as they always had. And through it all, they would have each other, because that was what mattered in the end. Not the house they'd built or the money they'd saved or the things they'd accumulated. What mattered was the love they'd found in the most unlikely of circumstances, when ice cracked beneath her feet and she went under, and a mountain man plunged in and pulled her out, breathing. What mattered was that they'd chosen each other, day after day, year after year. That they'd built a life together from nothing but love and determination and faith in each other. That they'd taken two lonely, broken people and made a family, a home, a legacy. As they finally stood to go inside, Owen pulled Meredith close and kissed her, slow and sweet and full of the kind of love that only came from truly knowing someone. And she kissed him back, pouring 17 years of devotion into it, grateful for every moment, every memory, every day they'd had together. Their children were waiting inside, Oliver entertaining his siblings with some story about his latest adventure in the mountains. Margaret was setting the table for dinner. The twins were arguing about something inconsequential, and the house was warm and bright and alive. "Come on," Meredith said, tugging Owen toward the door. "Our family is waiting." "Our family," Owen repeated, as if he still could not quite believe it. "I like the sound of that." They went inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next, because they knew now, after all these years, that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The mountains would always be there, standing watch over the little house on the outskirts of Denver. The creek would always flow, cold and clear and dangerous. And the memory of that day, when a young woman's foolishness and a mountain man's heroism brought two souls together, would always be the foundation of their love story. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they met, Meredith and Owen would tell them the tale, about the frozen creek and the cracking ice and the desperate rescue, about the gruff mountain man and the stubborn young woman who refused to let him push her away, about love found in the unlikeliest of places, in the harsh beauty of the Colorado Territory in 1872. And the grandchildren would listen, wide-eyed, and dream of adventures of their own. But they would also see the way their grandparents still looked at each other, still reached for each other's hands, still kissed goodbye like it might be the last time, and they would understand that this was what love looked like, real and enduring and worth fighting for. Oliver eventually took over his father's trapping business, but he was smarter about it, building it into a proper trade with hired trappers and regular routes. He married a girl from Denver and had 3 children of his own, and he taught them to respect the mountains the way his father had taught him. Margaret married a lawyer and moved to Colorado Springs, but she came home often, bringing her own children to stay with their grandparents. She would watch her mother and father together and hope that her own marriage would be half as strong, half as enduring. The twins went into business together, opening a general store in Denver that catered to trappers and mountain men. They were shrewd businessmen, but they were also generous, often extending credit to those who needed it, remembering how their father had once been one of those men. And through it all, Owen and Meredith remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements slower, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared experiences and deepened by mutual respect. In the winter of 1895, when Meredith was 46 and Owen was 53, they made the trek up to the cabin one last time. It had been years since they'd been there, the house in Denver and their growing family keeping them close to town. But they both felt the pull of the place where they had first fallen in love, where they had built the foundation of their life together. The cabin was exactly as they had left it, dusty but sound. Owen built up the fire while Meredith looked around, memories flooding back. This was where he'd first told her he loved her, where they'd spent their first summer as a married couple, where she'd first realized she was carrying Oliver. "Do you remember?" Owen asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Every moment," she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I remember being so scared that I would wake up and this would all be a dream, that you would realize you did not really want me." "Never," he said fiercely. "I have wanted you from the moment I pulled you out of that creek. I will want you until the day I die and beyond." They spent 3 days at the cabin, just the two of them, reliving old memories and making new ones. They made love in the bed where they'd first come together as husband and wife, and it was just as sweet, just as passionate as it had been all those years ago. They walked the trails they used to walk, visited the meadow where he'd proposed, and they talked about the life they'd built, the family they'd raised, the love they'd nurtured. "I am proud of us," Meredith said on their last evening there. "We took something fragile and made it strong. We took 2 people who were afraid to love and made a family." "I am proud of us too," Owen said, "but mostly I am grateful. Grateful that you fell through that ice, grateful that I was there to pull you out, grateful for every day since. Even the hard days? Especially the hard days. Those are the ones that proved what we had was real." They returned to Denver the next day, back to their children and grandchildren, back to the life they'd built. But they carried the memory of those 3 days with them, a reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. The years continued to pass. Their children's children grew and had children of their own. Owen finally retired from trapping in his late 60s, content to putter around the house and spoil his ever-growing brood of grandchildren. Meredith continued to be the heart of the family, organizing dinners and celebrations, making sure everyone stayed connected. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1903, surrounded by more than 40 family members. Owen made a speech that night, his voice still strong despite his age. 30 years ago, I married the best woman I have ever known," he said, holding Meredith's hand. "I was just a lonely mountain man who did not know how to be with people. She taught me. She taught me how to love, how to be a husband, how to be a father. Everything good in my life I owe to her. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat," Meredith cried, of course, and so did half their children. It was a beautiful night, full of love and laughter and the kind of joy that only comes from family. But time, as it always does, continued its inexorable march. In the spring of 1907, Owen had a heart attack while working in the garden. He survived, but it weakened him, left him frail in a way he'd never been before. It scared both of them, the sudden reminder of mortality. "I'm not ready to leave you," he told Meredith one night as she sat beside his bed. "Then do not leave me," she said fiercely. "You are strong. You can beat this." And he did, through sheer force of will and Meredith's constant care. He recovered slowly, never quite regaining his full strength, but enough to keep living, keep enjoying the life they'd built. They had 7 more good years together. 7 years of watching grandchildren grow, of seeing great-grandchildren born, of quiet evenings on the porch and slow walks through town. 7 years of love, deeper and richer than ever. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in June of 1914, at the age of 72. Meredith was beside him, as she'd been beside him for 42 years. She held his hand as he took his last breath and whispered that she loved him, would always love him. The funeral was attended by more than 100 people, a testament to the life Owen had lived in the family he'd built. His sons and grandsons carried his coffin, and he was buried in the Denver cemetery with a headstone that read simply, Owen Vance, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He saved her life, and she saved his soul. Meredith lived for another 9 years, surrounded by her family, carrying Owen with her in every moment. She told his stories, kept his memory alive, made sure their great-grandchildren knew about the man who'd pulled her from the frozen creek and changed her life forever. When she passed away in 1923 at the age of 74, she was buried beside Owen, their graves side by side as they'd been in life. Her headstone matched his in simplicity. Meredith Vance, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She taught him to love, and he taught her to live. Their children gathered at the graveside, along with dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And as they stood there, remembering the couple who'd started it all, they told the story once more. The story of the ice cracking beneath her feet, of the mountain man who plunged in and pulled her out breathing. The story of 2 unlikely people who found each other in the wild beauty of Colorado and built something that would last for generations. It was a love story, pure and simple. Not perfect, not easy, but real and enduring. The kind of love that saved 2 souls and created a legacy. The kind of love that the mountains themselves seemed to honor, standing watch over their final resting place, eternal and unchanging. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the years they'd had, though they were grateful for each one, not the things they'd accumulated or the status they'd achieved. What mattered was the love, the choice they'd made, over and over again, to be together, to build something beautiful out of 2 broken people and a moment of crisis on a frozen creek. That was the legacy of Owen and Meredith Vance, not just the children they'd raised or the business they'd built, but the proof that love, real love, could conquer anything, that 2 people, different as could be, could find each other and make a life worth living, that a mountain man and a boarding house worker could become the foundation of a family that would last for generations. Their story lived on, told and retold, a reminder to their descendants that love was worth fighting for, worth believing in, that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places, from a frozen creek and a desperate rescue and 2 hearts brave enough to take a chance on each other. The mountains still stand watch over Denver, as they always have. The creeks still run cold and clear, dangerous and beautiful. And somewhere in the cemetery, beneath the Colorado sky, Owen and Meredith Vance rest together, their love story complete but never forgotten. Because that is what real love does. It endures, it inspires. It creates ripples that spread out through time, touching lives that will never know the original source, but will feel its effects nonetheless. That is the legacy of a love that began with ice cracking beneath her feet, with a mountain man who plunged in and pulled her out breathing. A love that saved 2 lives and created countless more. A love that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes the best things in life are worth getting a little cold for. And in the end, that was their gift to the world. Not wealth or fame or power, but the simple, profound truth that love, real love, is the only thing that truly matters, the only thing that lasts, the only thing that makes the hard days bearable and the good days glorious. They found it in each other, against all odds, and they held onto it with everything they had. And that, more than anything else, is a story worth telling, a story worth remembering, a story that will live on as long as there are people who believe in the transformative power of love. Owen and Meredith Vance, mountain man and boarding house worker, husband and wife, parents and grandparents, 2 souls who found each other in the Colorado Territory in 1872 and built something beautiful that would last forever. That is their story. Complete, closed, perfect in its imperfections. And it all began with a crack in the ice, a plunge into freezing water, and a strong hand reaching down to pull her out breathing.